Hi everyone, this video shows you some simple definitions and techniques or tricks that will help you solve the game theories that we learned in topic 10 and will be helpful for your test. Think of game theory as a framework where you have two entities or players, so to speak, competing with each other for their own gain. Now each player has a number of strategies, let's say two strategies, and it knows what his opponent's possible strategies are, but what it doesn't know is what its opponent is actually playing. And a player's payoff or gain or profit or whatever you call it, it depends not only on what it does, but also what its opponent does. Now let's look at a simple trick to solve a game of two players, each with two strategies. Let's say I have a game in which I have two players, player 1 and player 2. Player 1 has only two strategies. Either he can play the top strategy or the bottom strategy, and player 2 can play either left or right strategy. And depending on what player 1 does and what player 2 does, their payoffs or profits will be determined as these numbers show here. And all the numbers that you see on the bottom left corner of each cell, they correspond to player 1's payoffs. And all the numbers that you see on the top right corner of each cell belongs to player 2 as payoffs. Now, to solve the game, let's put ourselves in the shoes of player 1 first. Player 1 doesn't know what player is going to do, but he's thinking, what if player 2 played left strategy? Then the game would be stuck on this left column. And in the left column, for player 1, bottom strategy would be better because it brings him $200 instead of top strategy bringing him $100. So let's circle this 200. And now let's ask ourselves as player 1, what should player 1 do if player 2 played right strategy? If player 2 played right, then the game would be stuck on the right column. And on the right column, we can see 50 is bigger than or better than 0, and therefore player 2 should play bottom strategy. Circle that 50. And now let's do the same procedure for player 2. Put ourselves in the shoes of player 2. And even though we don't know what player 1 is going to do, let's think what player 2 should do if player 1 played top strategy. If player 1 played top, the game would be stuck on this top row. On the top row, I can see 200 is better than 100 for player 2. So circle this 200. So playing right would be better for player 2. Similarly, what should player 2 do if player 1 played the bottom strategy? If player 1 played bottom, the game would be stuck on this bottom row. And on this bottom row, we can see 50 is better than 0 for player 2. So circle this 50, and player 2 therefore should play right strategy. So now, after you circled the numbers for each player, just find the cell where both numbers have been circled. That is the cell or outcome which is going to be the equilibrium in this game. By equilibrium, we mean stability, and in any game or any situation, whenever something converges to a specific outcome, we call that outcome a possible equilibrium. So this is a Nash equilibrium in this game. Now, in this game, each player, by the way, has a so-called dominant strategy. For example, if you look at what player 1 would do depending on what player does, player 1 always plays this bottom strategy regardless of what player 2 does, because only the bottom numbers are circled, as you can see. Similarly, player 2 has a dominant strategy, which is the right strategy. How do we know that? Because we can see these numbers on the right column are all circled for player 2, which means player 2 would always play right strategy regardless of what player 1 does. So in that sense, just because each player has a dominant strategy, This game leads to an equilibrium which is also called a dominant strategy equilibrium. Now let us do an example of a game using the trick that we have just learned. Let's say Saudi and Venezuela are two oil producers, and each of them has two strategies, either to produce low output or high output. And depending on who does what, these numbers are showing their outcomes or payoffs to each of the players. So to solve the game, let's put ourselves first in the shoes of Saud's shoes. And as Sauds, we are thinking, what if Venezuela produced low output? In that case, the game would be stuck on this left column, and as Saud, our best strategy would be producing high output because that gives $200 million of profit, which is better than $180 million of profit. So circle this $200 million. And then let's think for ourselves as Sauds. What if Venezuela produced high output? The game would then be stuck on the right column, and on the right column for Saud, 160 million would be better than $150 million. So circle that, and to have that, Saud would produce high output. So we can already see that Saud has a dominant strategy, and that strategy is to produce high output regardless of what Venezuela does. And second step, let's put ourselves in the shoes of Venezuela and ask ourselves, what if Saud produced low output? In that case, game would be stuck on the top row, and there $200 million looks better than $180 million. So circle that, and to have that, Venezuela will have to produce high output. Similarly, what if Saud produced high output? In that case, game would get stuck on this lower row, and in the lower row, 160 million is better for Venezuela than 150 million, so Venezuela would produce high output. Circle that. And now look for these cells out of this 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 cells where both numbers are circled. Where both numbers are circled, that is going to be the Nash equilibrium of this game. However, this Nash equilibrium is also a dominant strategy equilibrium because each player has a dominant strategy of producing high output regardless of what the opponent does. And by the way, you can see in this game that even though by cooperating with each other, each player could make more money, each of them could make $180 million if they could trust each other and cooperate. However, in this duopoly setup, there is always a tension between this joint profit maximization and individual profit maximization by cheating, and therefore they could not cooperate, or they could not keep their promise to each other even if they had promised to cooperate. And that is a classic case of so-called prisoner's dilemma, where cooperation is most often not possible between two players. And this is a classic example to show how human behaves intelligently on their own behalf, but collectively their behavior turns out to be suboptimal and often stupid. So together, due to the tension between self-interest and joint interest, the outcome that they are achieving through this game is suboptimal, is worse than what they could have achieved if they cooperated with each other. Here is yet another example of how individual entities, firms, or countries can make perfectly intelligent and rational decisions on their own behalf, but collectively they end up making stupid decisions. The post-World War II arms race between USA and former Soviet Union is a classic example of such collectively stupid human behavior. After the World War II, each of these countries had two strategies to follow: to produce more nuclear warheads or disarm. And based on who does what, the outcomes for each of them would be determined. And now let's put ourselves in the shoes of one country at a time to solve this game. So from the payoff matrix, you can see that if both countries disarmed, they each could be safe and they each could avoid wasting so much money on these nuclear warheads. However, the world ended up producing a lot more arms, so they both produced more and more arms. Let's see how that happens. Put yourself in the shoes of USA first, and then think for USA what you should do if Russia produced more arms. The game would be stuck on this left column, and the left column becoming strong and unsafe would be better than weak and unsafe. So to achieve this outcome, USA would produce more arms. Circle that. And what should USA do if Russia disarmed? The game would in that case get stuck on the right column. On the right column for USA, becoming strong and safe would be better than becoming just safe. So circle the strong and safe. To have that payoff, USA would produce arms. So you can see USA has a dominant strategy, produce more arms regardless of what Russia does. Similarly, if you put yourself in the shoes of Russia, then you think, what should Russia do if USA produced more arms? In which case the game would get stuck on the top row. On the top row, strong and unsafe is better than weak and unsafe, and therefore Russia would produce more arms. And oppositely, if USA disarmed, even then Russia would produce more arms because strong and safe would be better than just safe. So circle that too. And once you circle all the outcomes, there's only one cell where both numbers or payoffs are circled, so that is this game's equilibrium, where each country is producing more arms. So far we have seen that in game theory, any equilibrium is called Nash equilibrium. However, in a game where each player has a dominant strategy, then we have a single equilibrium which is called the dominant strategy equilibrium. Now let us talk about a game where neither player has a dominant strategy, and therefore we will not have a single dominant strategy equilibrium. Let's say we have two players called Tesla and Nikola. Each of them has two strategies, either produce low amount of output or high amount of output. Depending on who does what, their outcomes, i.e. profits from the businesses, are given by these numbers. Put yourself in the shoes of Tesla, and you are thinking, what if Nikola produces low output, i.e. in which case the game would get stuck on this left column. On the left column, 200 is better than 180, so Tesla would produce high output to achieve that. Circle this number. Then ask yourself, what should Tesla do if Nikola produces high output? In which case the game would be stuck on this right column. On the right column, we can see for Tesla 160 is better than 150, and therefore it would produce low output to achieve this $160 million of profit. So now you can see Tesla doesn't have a dominant strategy. Depending on what Nikola does, i.e. if Nikola produces low output, Tesla does high output. But if Nikola does high output, Tesla does low output. Similarly, now put yourself in the shoes of Nikola, and if Tesla produced low output, the game would be stuck on top row, and on the top row, high output, i.e. $200 million of profit would be better for Nikola, and Nikola would therefore produce high output. However, if Tesla produced high output, in which case game would get stuck on the bottom row, then Nikola would produce low output because $160 million would be better than $150 million here. So now, after we circle all the possibilities, we can see we have two cells where both numbers are circled, and that tells us that both of these cells are possible equilibria. We are not sure what will actually happen in this game, but we know that either Tesla producing high, Nikola producing low output is an equilibrium, or another possible equilibrium is Tesla producing low and Nikola producing high output. So in this case, these two possible equilibria are still Nash equilibria, but neither of them is a dominant strategy equilibrium because neither player has any dominant strategy.